When you first start working with your breath in a functional capacity, looking at how you can improve your focus, concentration, mood, performance, all of these different aspects of your life via focusing on the breath, you can sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that you can just do it and you'll get great results. Now that is definitely possible, but there comes a point when being a little bit more particular, a little bit more scientific about your approach will lead to better results. Now the reason this happens is quite simple. When you start to measure things, you start to focus on things. We know this from business, we know this from economics, we know this from science, that measuring somehow makes us pay more attention. Now with breath, we might confuse ourselves a little bit and think that there's no real way to measure our progress, except for maybe doing something like how long can I hold my breath underwater or something like that. Now that would be a measure, but will it really tell you how well you're progressing with your breath practice day to day? Maybe. I've honestly not tried it. However, one thing I want to point out to you today in this video is how you can measure what's going on in your body in a way that will actually give you some information about how well you are breathing, whether you have any breathing dysfunction, where and how you can potentially improve your wellness via changing your breath practices, and it can even inform which breath patterns and which practices are best for you right now. So my question to you is, if you don't know where you are right now, how can you adequately create a plan to get to somewhere that you might want to go to? It's not a trick question. It sounds like a trick question, but honestly it's not. You need a baseline, you need a starting point, you need a way to measure your progress. Now, because we're talking about breathing, we can fall into the trap of thinking that it's just about how you feel. Now that is an intrinsic measure of how well it's going. If you're not getting sick, if you feel like you've got more energy, if you're more focused, yes, that's all good stuff. However, we can get a lot more scientific. And one way we can do this is by using what is called a BOLT score. That comes from the Oxygen Advantage, blood oxygen level test. In the Buteyko method, it's called a controlled hold. What it actually does is measure your capacity to withstand, to tolerate the buildup of carbon dioxide in your body. And it measures your breathing capacity effectively. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it gives us, or it gives you, or it gives anyone who wants to do something with their breath, a baseline. And what we need to do individually is be very consistent about how we measure this BOLT score, this controlled hold time, so that we're measuring apples versus apples, not apples versus oranges. So let me explain the test to you. You can quite safely try this for yourself. What I will say before you go into this practice, and in fact any other breath practice, is be sensible, be smart about it. If you feel like this is too challenging for you, then don't do it. If you feel like there is a reason that you need some professional advice, whether it's from someone who educates people about breath, trains people in breath, or it's a medical professional, then go and get that help first. Take some personal responsibility. That's the best thing that you can do. That said, all this test is measuring is your tolerance of carbon dioxide as you hold your breath. We achieve this by holding the breath on the exhalation. So we inhale and exhale normally, preferably through the nose, and then on one of the exhalations, we simply pinch and hold the nose so no air can get in or out while our mouth is closed, and we count the time in seconds, preferably with some kind of timer that's not just in our head, so we can be accurate. So it might be on your phone, or the old-fashioned wristwatch, or indeed stopwatch if you've still got one of those around. And we just count in seconds. How long can we hold our breath until we get the first physical signal to breathe? Now this is the part that we really have to talk about. We have to talk into this part, because if you don't understand what that signal is, if you're not sensitive to that signal, then you can't measure. When you hold your breath on the exhalation and carbon dioxide builds up, it is the buildup of carbon dioxide that gives your body the signal to breathe. What normally happens is that is felt in the diaphragm. There's a little flutter in the diaphragm. But for most people, at least in my experience, they are not sensitive enough to feel the diaphragm flutter. And that's okay, because the body will give you a secondary signal, which is the obvious, definite signal. And that's almost like a little tremor in the throat. Now, when that happens, that's a definite signal to breathe. That is the signal that we're looking for. It's the physiological, the bodily, the somatic feeling of needing to breathe, not the signal that you might get in your head that's saying, hey, this is crazy. Why are you holding your breath? That is a psychological signal. That's important as well, but in the context of this test, we need to get past that. If you've not held your breath before, the idea and the sensation of holding your breath may be psychologically challenging. If that's the case, just practice it a little bit. It's okay to not get it right the first time. Here is how you do the test. Sit with your mouth closed, breathing in and out of your nose at whatever your normal frequency and rhythm of breathing is. You don't have to change anything other than the fact that you need to be breathing through your nose. This is important for a number of reasons. In the context of this test, it's so that you do the same thing every time before you do the test, so we can again measure apples with apples. So you're breathing in and out of your nose. I would suggest you do that sitting comfortably for 2 to 3 minutes, just so everything's calmed down. As you may know, when you feel like you're getting tested, sometimes you can get really excited, and when that happens with your breath, you breathe faster and more shallow. It's not natural. It affects the measurement at the end. So breathing normally for 2 to 3 minutes through the nose. On an exhalation, you exhale fully. And then after you've exhaled fully, you pinch and hold the nose. As soon as you've pinched and held the nose, you start your stopwatch and you let that stopwatch go until you get that feeling in your throat that you need to breathe. Whatever the number of seconds on your stopwatch is from the moment you stopped breathing to the moment you started breathing again, that is your BOLT score. Write that down. That gives you a baseline. Now, this next part that I'm going to say, it's important that you do your best to not let it allow you to try and get a higher score. Because if you try to get a higher score and you hold your breath longer past this sensation, you're measuring something else. You're measuring your maximal ability to hold your breath, which is a psychological test rather than a physiological test. It is not going to be apples versus apples. It's definitely going to be apples versus oranges. So, even though I'm going to give you a number right now, I don't want you to try and reach that number. All I want you to do is accurately measure how many seconds it takes for you when you stop breathing to when you start breathing in. That is all. So here's a measure. If your BOLT score is less than 20 seconds, you have some work to do. If it's higher than 20 seconds, it's indicative of you having adequate functional breathing. And yet there is still more that you can do to improve your BOLT score. When you get your BOLT score up to 40, you are doing really, really well with the functionality of your breathing. When your BOLT score is less than 20, it can be indicative of breathing dysfunction. That does not mean that you have breathing dysfunction. It just means the chances that you have breathing dysfunction are higher, and the scientific literature points to this as well. So please, use the BOLT score, the controlled hold time, as a baseline measure so you can see how you are progressing with your breath practice. When would you do this? The absolute best time, again, so you can measure consistently, is when you wake in the morning. So get out of bed, put your feet on the floor, find a good posture, breathe for 2 to 3 minutes, do your BOLT score, and then move on with your day and measure it the next day. Now you can measure this every morning, you can measure it once a week, whatever. Be consistent. It gives you a baseline and it will show you the trend of your improvements, or maybe no improvement at all, or maybe you get ill and it goes backwards. This is all important data for you to make decisions about how you breathe, why you breathe, and what you're trying to achieve, and whether certain practices are working for you. Let's leave it there. There is so much more we could get into about this particular topic, just like every other breathing topic. Please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the video. I appreciate that you're here and that you watch this video all the way through. I'll see you next time. Breathe easy and be well.